Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. My name is Sierra McKissick. I am the Public Programs Coordinator at the Hyde Park Art Center. We're really excited to have you all here for this conversation tonight, the catalyst and preservation of cultural institutions. We're joined by some amazing panelists who Pascale Ife Williams, our moderator, will introduce in just a bit. But this event in totality is a part of our Faheem Majeed exhibition, Planting and Maintaining a Perennial Garden, Shrouds, that we currently have up at the Hyde Park Art Center. It's wonderful exhibition. If you haven't been to the art center to check it out, please do. We are taking appointments right now for people to come through, and we also have our garage doors open, so if you happen to be walking around the neighborhood and find yourself stumbling upon the Hyde Park Art Center, you can definitely just walk inside and take in the art. It's very grand, it's very beautiful, and it's a love letter to the South Side, as the Chicago Reader has called it in the press that they've recently released around the exhibition. So I wanted to talk a bit about what we're going to be talking about today. We have representatives from Chicago-based culture-specific and arts institutions to discuss how institutions are uniquely positioned to take on the role of culture keepers and enable communities of color to find power in their collective identities. So we have a great group of roundtablists tonight. We have Debra Yepa-Pappan, artist and Native Community Engagement Coordinator for the Native American Exhibition Hall at the Field Museum, Cesareo Moreno, Visual Arts Director and Chief Curator at the National Museum of Mexican Art, and Carla Stillwell, Executive Director of the Stillwell Institute for Contemporary Black Art. And the conversation will be moderated by Pascale Ife Williams. And what we've been trying to do in conjunction with our Faheem Majeed exhibition is have conversations like these, really to hone in on the cultural work that he does, the community-based work, and the social practice. A lot of Faheem's work is driven by those very things and bringing people together. He was formerly the executive director of the Southside Community Arts Center, and the exhibition as a whole is really having a conversation about that as well too. Faheem Majeed has created a new installation that furthers his investigation of culturally specific institutions by focusing on the historic and memory aspects of the historic Southside Community Arts Center. The exhibition's installation includes a large-scale rubbing of the Southside Community Arts Center's exterior of the building. We also have a stage that has been built that is to mimic the floorboards and the paneling walls that the Southside Community Arts Center is known widely for. It was started by a group of Black students from the SAIC, most notably Margaret Burroughs and people like Charles White and Elder Curator, and we have been able to honor their legacy through the work that they've been doing continually at the Southside Community Arts Center. And this is a way that our two institutions have been able to join forces and have conversations that are very important, specifically to Chicago and specifically to the South Side, and being able to have these conversations about culture and what it means to be a gatekeeper in that sense as well too. So I definitely am excited to dive into this conversation. We've had conversations about artists past and present. We've had conversations for Open House Chicago and how architecture and space and social practice and engagement informs the work of Chicago. And we also have forthcoming programs as well on architecture and Black lives coming up later in July, and a rubbing activity where you can create your own rubbing with one of our teens who helped assist Faheem over the summer making that rubbing of the Southside Community Arts Center. So I'm going to introduce Pascale so that we can dive into this conversation. Just a moment, I'm going to find where that went. Pascale Ife Williams is a Black, mixed-race, queer, feminist, mother, artist, organizer, and space creator. She graduated in 2015 from DePaul University with a BA in community psychology and is currently pursuing a doctoral degree at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the School of Human Ecology, Civil Society, and Community Research Program. She is a Chicago native with over 10 years of experience in justice-driven arts and community-engaged work. Ife seeks to engage community through radical imagination, visioning, and the activation and facilitation of creative and spiritually expressive learning. Her life's work explores and complicates racial, gender, and wellness equity. Ife is a founding member of the now inoperative Art Forward, the Healing and Safety Council in BYP 100, and the Power Collective at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. This program is also supported by the Terra Foundation and a number of wonderful donors as well. And with that, I will hand it over to Ife. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Sierra, for introducing me. I always feel funny when my full bio is read out, but I am going to do that for our wonderful panelists as well. So just to give our audience, thank you all for joining us, a sense of where we're going this evening, I'm going to introduce our lovely and just really experienced panelists. We will then go into a dialogue, kind of guided dialogue within the four of us and open up for questions and answers at the end of our time together. So Debra Yepa-Pappan is Jimenez Pueblo from the Jimenez Pueblo and half Korean, is the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Native American Exhibition Hall at the Field Museum, as Sierra shared. She welcomes Native American guests to the museum and facilitates their visits to collections. As an active member of the Chicago Native American community, she also serves as a liaison between the museum and the community, both locally and nationally. She is an artist with international acclaim in the field of contemporary Native American art, and through her artwork and her work at the Field Museum, she is committed to changing inaccurate representations of Native people and advocates for the inclusion of Native first voice and perspectives. Yepa-Pappan lives in her hometown of Chicago with her husband, artist Chris Papan, and her daughter, Jihae. Cesareo Moreno has been with the National Museum of Mexican Art since 1992. He has been the visual arts director since 1995 and was named the museum's first full-time chief curator in 2004. Moreno has curated numerous exhibitions for the National Museum of Mexican Art. Among his most important assignments are Arte de Saño Chicago in 2018, A Declaration of Immigration in 2008, and The African Presence in Mexico, From Yanga to the Present in 2006. Additionally, he has curated 14 of the annual Day of the Dead exhibitions, which everyone should visit when they're in Chicago if they have not, to date, and the permanent exhibition, Nuestras Historias, Stories of Mexican Identity from the permanent collection. And last but not least, Carla Stillwell has been an award-winning actor, playwright, and director for 3 decades. She's the former artistic director for MPAACT Theater, as well as playwright in residence. Ms. Stillwell began her directorial career with a late-night stage production of the popular 70s sitcom Good Times. I remember that when I was young. She went on to direct Ade Moon's critically acclaimed work, She Calls Up the Sun in 2008, among many other wonderful works. In 2014, she was a workshop director of 2 new works by Shepsu Eku and Keith Joseph Atkins at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, later directing for MPAACT's 2015-2016 season, which is dedicated to the Black Lives Matter movement, and Shepsu Eku's Never the Milk and Honey in 2017. As a playwright, some of her credits include a one-woman show, Carla in Search of My Silky Underthings, 2020, Defending Myself, 2003, and again, many other wonderful original works. Ms. Stillwell is a teaching artist with Victory Gardens Theater and will be joining the Loyola University, Theater Department's adjunct staff in spring of 2022. Ms. Stillwell has founded the Stillwell Institute for Contemporary Black Arts. This organization moves with a mission to recruit, develop, and support contemporary Black artists and to teach art making in the Black community as a healing practice, a vehicle for social change and a viable career opportunity. For the full bios of our wonderful panelists, I invite you to look them up on their websites or on their professional platforms. But thank you all so much for being here with us in this conversation. So I would love to start. And I think that whoever feels called to begin, we can kind of move in that way. But I would love to start by asking you all how you define culture keeping, and what about the practice of creating the space for community in regards to specific cultures is sacred to you.
Anybody?
After you, sir.
Okay, thank you. And it's great to be here this evening. I love the work that is always being done at the Hyde Park Art Center, and how you have this great way of bringing people together sometimes to talk about things that are uncomfortable. But coming from the arts, we know that that's a part of what we do. I really do take the word curator very seriously, and I'm often teased in my family and among friends because that has just become such a popular word these days for, ordering a pair of shoes and socks. They come curated. I've seen ice cream that's curated, and many other products and things like that. I do feel it's a little unfortunate that the word has now been spread so thin that it just means choice or choose, or edit in some cases. But I really feel that curating is an essential part of this activity, a human activity of carefully bringing the past into the present. And sometimes it means letting go of things. Sometimes it means realizing that they have morphed or changed. The next generation needs to make it their own. But I think it has a lot to do with saving and hanging on to our cultural stories, and oftentimes that's through objects or works of art. So this thing of preserving culture, and caring for it. The word curate it's closer to the word cuidar, which means to care for. And so it is a caring of culture, taking care of it, but it doesn't imply that you preserve it in the same exact way in which your ancestors handed it down to you. And of course, with that comes the implication that there are solutions, there are ideas, there are systems in place that can help you in the present navigate the future, that our ancestors, that those who came before us really passed on this legacy to us of how to figure things out, how to find what's important, and how to do that in a way that is meaningful and is part of the everyday activity. In other words, it's not like going to school, right? It's sometimes cultural ideas come to us at the dinner table, or in a car when you're driving for a couple of hours with family. I'll stop there.
For me, the preservation of culture is also the investment in culture. I think that just my years as a working artist gave me perspective around the ways in which we, especially, I will only speak for the Black community, the way we have been taught to divest from our art. That there is a type of art, a way to create that is a standard, and that it is not worthwhile to invest your time and your resources in the creation of cultural works. So for me, it is about the investment. It is about finding the resources for artists, making sure they have the tools to create, what ancestor Toni Morrison told us: if you haven't read the book you want to read, then you must write it. So you have to invest, and you have to invest as much in the culture and the creation of the work as you take from it. So that's my idea in this moment.
So first I want to start off with, just thanking everyone. And, I appreciate being part of this conversation. And I do want to, before I even start with anything, I need to, as in part of keeping, cultural protocol, I just want to, start with this statement, that although I consider myself a Chicagoan, as a Jemez Pueblo and Korean woman, I acknowledge that I am a guest on this land. This land was home to Potawatomi people who were forcibly removed from here. Ojibwe, Odawa, Menominee, Ho-Chunk, Miamia, Meskwaki, and Peoria people also had relationships with this land and each other. My respects and gratitude go out to all the Native ancestors who once lived here, and also to my Native brothers and sisters who continue to live here. So I guess in talking or thinking about, culture keeping, that is one way that, by putting something like this into practice is a way for me to keep culture and move culture forward, especially in regard to Native culture. I'm also coming from, and I have so many thoughts on this question. When I first read this question, I'm like, I don't know how to answer this. But now, like, my head is just swimming with so many different thoughts around this, because I'm coming from so many different angles, trying to define or to answer this question, because I work at an institution that was a culture stealer. They stole our culture. They stole our culture away from us in the hopes of, as a genocidal practice, right? To kind of take that humanity away from us, and just kind of fizzle us out. But then as a Native person and as a Korean person, I'm so steeped in those two cultures. And I pay a lot more attention to my Native culture because I'm here in the United States, and my ancestral homelands are in Jemez Pueblo, New Mexico, in the Southwest. And culture for us there, culture keeping is a different thing. We have people in our community that specifically are designated or initiated into keeping certain aspects of our culture, and keeping our culture, and Sierra said this earlier about, in some ways, culture keeping is also gatekeeping. As Native people, to preserve our culture and preserve who we are as a people, we've had to do some gatekeeping there. So there's certain aspects of our culture that we keep to ourselves, we don't share, and those we have designated people in our community that maintain that part, and have since since the beginning of time. These are parts of our culture that have always existed and will continue to exist, because of our culture keepers. But then there are those other parts of our culture that we do share with the public. We do have ceremonies that we invite everyone to come to. So yeah, that, and there's so much more that I think we can go into, but for me, that's kind of how I'm answering this question right now.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for your shares. Thank you, Deborah, for the really important practice of land acknowledgement. As a practice of culture keeping, I love what you said about keeping it and moving it forward, and the importance of gatekeeping in cultures, especially that have been oppressed by white supremacy and settler colonization and other things, around even like protecting and preserving traditions. Cesareo, I think you were speaking to kind of the lineage of culture keeping and the responsibility to ancestry and also the future. You know, I saw you moving forward and backwards, and then culture as a commitment to investing. So my next question is around what questions are you all asking yourselves, or do you think are, you know, the most important questions that we need to be talking about in regards to cultural institutions in this time?
We're gonna ask. Go. Please, please.
I don't know if I had a thought. I think that was a yeah. Good questions. I think the question we have to ask, I think it's a twofold question. Who is telling the story and who is paying to have the story told? I think those are the questions for me in the capacity that I've decided to work in my life. Who's telling the story and who's financing the telling of that story? Because I think those things are linked. And I think as cultural ambassadors, those of us who stake or put our little flag in the sand and say, this, we do this work on behalf of this culture, who else is putting a flag in and who's supporting it? And as a person that wants to support Black art specifically, who is behind me? Who do I go to? Who helps tell the story? Who is an ally? Who is a co-conspirator? And who's culturally appropriating? You know, especially when you work in a small institution and people ask you to partner. You know, it's one of the things you're asked a lot to. Well, you know, you could always partner with this larger institution, but are they partnering? Are they getting that money to check a box or to actually serve a shared mission? So those are some of the questions I have right now around, as Deborah says, gatekeeping. You know.
Yeah, I like that. I think, I mean, I agree with you. Who is telling the story and who is buying the story, right? And, you know, and I think about that a lot when I think about, you know, the institution that I'm working at, because yes, again, you know, they were the culture stealers. Not only did they steal cultures, but they also took the authority, right, to tell that story, to share their narrative, for whatever agenda they had. And we know what agenda they had, right? They contributed to racism. They contributed to white supremacy. They could, you know, they're colonial institutions, you know, the one that I work at specifically. And so, and then they've, you know, they've gate kept that from us to, you know, to stagnate, you know, who we are and to stagnate our cultures. And so, and then I think the public that goes in to buy those tickets and to view our cultures on display, you know, they believe that authority. They believe that the museum is the authority on all of that, and they believe their narrative. And so then what do we have to do today, right? We have to go in and fix all of that. And we have to tell people and reteach the public that no, what they've been teaching you has been wrong for all of these years. But what we have to do now is take that agency back and take that authority back. And so that's one reason why I'm there, because it's just such a huge, important job to do. And to really, and then not just at the museum, I'm doing this like everywhere, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at everything and critiquing everything, you know, anything that has Native content or Native imagery. So because our voices were erased and silenced, and they were always telling our stories for us. And no more. Our voices are loud now. We're gonna speak out and yell out and take our voices back, and we're gonna be the storytellers. We're gonna be the ones to change that narrative and tell our truths, right? And so we have to reteach the public, because I think a lot of times the public too, they don't know. They're going in there because they're being deceived by these institutions to believe that that's the truth. And so we have to reteach the public, right?
And they're being deceived intentionally,
Right.
to an end.
Sure.
The deception about our art is a hand to capitalism. It's all tied. It's being done for a reason. And I think that's part of the unraveling that Deborah, that you just spoke to, that we have to, like, I think when we talk about these things, we have to be unashamed to say we were intentionally silenced. As BIPOC people, we've been intentionally silenced. And why? I'll be quick.
No, those are great great observations on the way things sort of are. And at the National Museum of Mexican Art, one of our strongest philosophies is the first voice story. So we always tell our own story, and oftentimes we need to explain it to people who ask. And the best explanation is that other people can tell your story, but certainly you can tell your own story in the best way possible. You can tell it in your own way. And oftentimes maybe that means, maybe telling your own story in your own way doesn't just mean that you've got vibrant colors on the walls, but maybe it means that you have free admission. Maybe it means that you have bilingual labels. Maybe it means that you have a different kind of Spanish word that you use. Sometimes it's a Spanglish word, but that's still your story. And so you are your own storyteller. I also tell people that I do believe that what we have on our walls, the work, the artwork, the artifacts that we display come from our artists. They come from our makers of culture. And so they have the visions, the words, the ideas to explain certain things. And I think that allowing our artists to tell our story is probably one of the best things we can do. Young artists, older artists, the diversity within our culture is clear when you look at our exhibitions. And I'm not sure that would come through necessarily in other museums. So that whole notion of first voice, I think, is recognized. I think when people from our community come into our space and they read our labels and they see what we have, there's a nodding that happens because they're kind of saying, oh, I hear this loud and clear. So oftentimes that's sort of the marker, right? That's not that we don't create exhibits for everybody. We do create exhibits for everybody. But if my community understands it and relates to it, then it was successful. And hopefully people who are not of Mexican ancestry, you will see yourself in there too, because ultimately we're all doing the same thing in many ways. Just we just do it in different ways, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, thank you, Cesareo, for speaking to the criticality of telling our own stories. That's definitely kind of a through line that I'm hearing from folks. And as a particular practice of committing to allowing for the community artists to tell that story. I think, Carla, that your question around who's telling the story, right? So in Cesareo's response, like, we're telling our own story. And then who is paying for or buying the story really led us to the great conversation and addition that Deborah provided around culture keepers, as I'm kind of like restating it, as working to disrupt what has been a deceptive, silencing, hegemonic narrative and representation of our people, right, of our unique
Mhm.
communities, and then towards a commitment to reteach the public
Mhm.
audience. So I think like this, your conversation on this question is a great segue to my next question. And this is actually a doozy. This is like three questions in one. So I'll try to go slow, but they're all related. You know, in the wake of COVID-19, or, you know, and the racial reckoning, right? And the social reckoning, the political reckoning that some have awakened to, around the need for critical conversations about anti-racism, practice, social justice in cultural work. I'm curious how your institutions are addressing these larger conversations about disrupting white supremacy patterns, what strategies your institutions are taking, or do you believe that organizations need to take, if you know that if they're not your institution, to commit to a more equitable Chicago arts ecosystem?
You know, I could just jump on this, not quickly, but succinctly. In the last year, things have changed drastically, and I think a lot of people have seen that. And in the last year, I have certainly uh, been asked to comment or to, you know, join in or to collaborate with many different groups, and that feels good. In other words, a lot of institutions, I think, are starting to finally realize that what we have been saying and pointing to for so many decades might actually be true. And so I think a lot of people are looking to learn, and it certainly feels like there is a little bit more public empathy out there. There's still hatred. There's still people who are pushing back strongly, who don't want change. But I do sense that there are many institutions who are looking to change, who are looking around, looking in their own, whether it's their own boardrooms or their own closets or their own lunchrooms, and they're kind of trying to figure out, like, hey, maybe there is a pattern here. So that question that I feel people asking themselves more these days, I can't help but think it's good. And now obviously it's up to many different parts of society, not just the arts and culture, but, you know, many different parts, education. It's up to the different parts of society to come back with some sort of a response that really looks to the future and says, yeah, this is a pivot. I mean, I hate to use that word because everyone's using it these days, but things have been shaken to the ground, and I think it's an opportunity for us to be teachers, and to re-educate. I'll just say it that way, to re-educate those institutions in our city and in our country.
Um, I was waiting for you, Carla, but
No. After you.
Yeah, you know, I want to say that I wish that the institution that I work at was, you know, took that moment to do things differently and to change and to make statements. But, you know, institutions like that don't like to get political. And so they may say it on the inside that, yes, you know, we believe that we need to move in this direction, but not say it outwardly, which is very, very frustrating. You know, it's such you know, that place is just so contrary. Everything that they do, they say one thing, but then they don't do it. And so it is disappointing because, you know, I think a lot of museums and institutions around the country, around the world, really, in the last year, are being targeted as well they should be for their contributions to racism and their complicitness. And they're still slow to change on that front, right? They don't know how to. But then a lot of institutions are also, bringing in DEAI task forces and, trying to change the institution in that way. But, I think that you can't do DEAI without decolonization. Because that work is so critical, that work is so important, and especially for a lot of these institutions that house our Native ancestors and, house many of our Native, stolen cultural materials, and not just Native, right, but other people of color around the world. And so I think that what needs to happen is that they need to do some really serious self-reflecting as institutions. I am glad to see a lot of individuals, a lot of people doing that really hard self-reflection, especially white people. I was writing on the moment last year to just just get really angry with white people. And, I want to still do that because there's just, there's certain things that are said and done that, that we need to respond to, that we need to now have that voice to respond to and enact those changes. Whereas in the past, as Native people too, a lot of times I would have to worry about how I'm making somebody feel if I'm being critical or calling them out on something. And now I'm just like, no more, you know what? My feelings, what about my feelings? When do you ever worry about me and how I'm feeling about how or why you're doing something? So I liked that pivot. I like that change. And I think we just need to keep continuing on that but hope that those people change and grow with us as we're moving. If they want to stay back here, they can stay here. We're moving forward. We've got the future to go to.
I think that this is a very interesting question when you are steeped in a cultural institution. Like, I don't talk about anything but Black art all day. So I last year, especially when everything blew up, specifically around theater and Broadway and all that, because that was my world for so long, that I found myself, and I think that the place of people of color in this moment is to continue to remind, to everyone's point about education, it's all about race. See, we have, to Deborah's point, tried to coddle and cajole and to convince people to attempt to read history. And I think we have finally moved to a moment where I'm just going to tell you what it is. It's all about race. Everything, every system in this country was built around the keeping captive Africans and murdering Native Americans. That's what this country was founded on. And I think our job in this moment is to continue to be bold in our conversations around race. We are the experts in our field, and we understand historically how these things have played out. And it is our job to push people away from allyship toward co-conspiratorship. To be an ally just means you stand there. To conspire with me to change the system is a whole different thing. And I think that's the role of the Black and Brown and Indigenous artists in this moment, to not be quiet and to let go of the respectability politics we were all boggled with, the Cosby sweater politics that strangled us for 30 years, and be bold in our culture, and be bold in our art, and be bold in the truth. I think that is the beauty of the moment. I agree that it was a beautiful moment, and I think it's changing. And I just implore people of color to continue the push and not to give up, because I do see there has been a paradigm shift in in a portion of America. Because some things you just can't deny what you see on video for 9 minutes.
Yeah.
You can't.
You know, if I may also add something to that, I know that museums move so slowly. I don't know any other institutions that move as slowly as we do. And it's just part of the process, right? The for some reason that's the way we go. And it's interesting as I'm listening to you both talk. It's interesting that some of the ideas that are coming up is the Southside Community Art Center, you know, started by artists to have a space to speak and to to express their culture, their ideas. And the space where I work at, the National Museum of Mexican Art, was started by educators, CPS educators, and they weren't art teachers. They were math teachers, social studies, history teachers, and they saw the need. And so I love this idea that two of the institutions that are sort of shining examples of what we're talking about here today were arts and education. And you are absolutely right. I mean, I think you know, I would ask every educator out there, whether it's kindergarten or high school or 7th grade or wherever it may be, to really look at your curriculum, to really look at what you're teaching, and find what you're missing. And then, of course, there's the question of why are you missing that? Because you weren't taught to teach that. That's not a solid answer. So yeah, the idea of arts and education to me really are key to what we're talking about here today. And I just hope, I pray that we don't lose this moment, that we don't let our guard down, that in 3 years from now, we're not looking back on 2020 and saying, wow, that was a missed opportunity. So that's, yeah.
And the thing about it is, and I'll be quiet, that the art survives for millennium, millions and millions of years. The art is here long after we're all gone. So in moments like this, it is the most important to invest in the cultural art. This is the most important time to be hyper vigilant over who's telling the story, because the reason we're living through this moment is because in 1865, did nobody check what happened after the Civil War? Like the artifacts were glorified in a way that art was used, monuments were used in a way to continue a war for people that lost. This is the most important time to be hyper vigilant about what happens to our cultural art and what happens to the art and the story of now. Because it could go left again and we'll be right back here.
Thank you so much for what you all have just shared. I feel like I can't even encapsulate all of it. But one thing that I feel is really important to just like the bold, unapologetic, like, it ain't about your feels, like not at all. Not at all. And just to be in a space where we can just look at each other and be like, yeah, we ain't, no, okay, let's say what we gotta say. And I think that's, you know, to an extent, it's almost expected of us now, or at least it's, you know, it's, yeah, I guess, you know, I think that what you said, Deborah, around individuals doing the work allows for an opening of like maybe an individual to receive the boldness and the unapologetic kind of like truth that needs to be told. And we're obviously having to move towards shifting these institutions that, as Cesareo, you said, are moving so slow, right? But I really appreciate also what was said around allyship, like not, you know, allyship is not where it's at. Like, are you in the trenches with me or not? Because if not, right, then that's not, you know, that is not how we're moving towards really shifting these systems at a dominant level. So I think this actually works. And Cesareo said something around collaboration you when you first shared. And my next question is actually around that. So I'm curious to hear from you all in regards to your experience, Like, what are the ethics of collaborating with culturally specific arts institutions, right? If an institution, an organization wants to work with you, you know, because all of a sudden now they woke to the ways that they are implicit in white supremacy. What are the ethics for those institutions to work with you all?
Quite a while ago, but I can still remember clearly, we would get a phone call from an institution who wanted to collaborate, and we would soon find out that the decisions had already kind of been made, and that the plans had already been put into motion, and we were being called late to the collaboration because they just want to use the name, right? They want to check off the box and say that they consulted with this group. And that feels really bad because you are being used. And I think that if there is an ethic to it, and things have changed, by the way, we still get that occasional phone call of, hey, do you want to partner? But not receive any of the funding. But we have now been invited to the table in the right way. And I think the right way is early on. I think it's respectful, and I think it's seriously listening, and feeling like a true partner. The I shouldn't say the downside, but the other side of that coin, though, is that with that comes a lot of extra work. And I always, whenever we get these requests to collaborate, I always really need to look at it and figure out, okay, is this going to help the mission? Is this going to get our artists some of this pie? Are we going to get a bigger piece of the pie? And if that's the case, then that's what I wanted, and that's what we asked for. And so the responsibility is to collaborate well, and really try to make this happen. So there is more work out there, because of this. But as long as it's respectful and listening, they, to be at the table and not be listened to is just as bad as not being invited to the table.
And I also think I agree with all of that. And I think the question has to be, who is the staff? Who are you bringing from your front office? Who do you feel like is the artistic partner? Who's leading the project? Because I have people that reach out that want to work, because I work with artists across genres, and they want to bring my artist into this screaming white institution and situation, where my artist is alone and being asked to tell the story that that institutional organization once told, and not their own story. So it's always for me the question around who's leading, who are the leaders, where do we fit in the decision making when you come to the table? Because like was just pointed out, a lot of the times that's the first salvo of disrespect. That you come to the table and you tell me what it is, and we just want this here. And I think also, just as artists, you have to ask, is this a commission or is this a collaboration? Because if you're hiring me to do a specific piece for this moment for you, that's one conversation. But a lot of institutions confuse commission with collaboration.
Yeah. I really love what you both said. And, so one reason why I am at the Field Museum and I am helping with the renovation of the Native American Hall is that I'm bringing the expertise and knowledge of how to engage and properly interact with Native people, because there is a certain type of etiquette. And I think one thing that's really important is that these institutions should have somebody like the people that they want to work with, right? So you want to work with Native people, then you should have a Native person on staff that can be that point person, that could be that person that knows those protocols and how to greet, how to reach out to, or even just know where to find, you know, the artists and collaborators that we want to work with. So because I'm a visual artist, and I've, you know, my husband and I have been fully immersed in, you know, Native art communities. We have, you know, such a huge network of people that we know. So when we're developing these stories, I can think about these artists that would be perfect for that story. So then I'm reaching out to them, right? And so I have that relationship with these artists. So then they trust me. I already have a relationship, a friendship. So I can easily call them and invite them and make sure that while they're there working with the museum, that I'm also there to support them, that I'm also there to make sure that they're getting what they need, that they're being cared for, and I will advocate for them if they feel like, you know, something is not going right. So I think things like that. So like, I think institutions that should be part of their process is to have somebody that you know, the artists, the communities that they're working with can connect to personally in that way. I was going to say something else. So yeah, I mean, that's something that's just so critical. And, you know, and I use my network to find other artists. And they request for me to be there in the room with them so that they're not the only Native in the room with a bunch of people they don't know and they're not familiar with the process. So I'm in there kind of, you know, watching out for them and, you know, making sure that the museum is not going to do anything to harm them, because my top priority being there is to take care of Native people. And the way that I like to say this is that I work at the museum for Native people. I don't work for the museum. So,
Right.
you know, and I think it would be wonderful if every institution that we all worked with, you know, had somebody that we can connect with in that way, right? So I fully advocate for every institution to have these, you know, liaisons, these community engagement people, not just for Native community, but for all, you know, the communities that they want to work with, right? So that we're watching them.
Yeah.
I think that the institutions should, I think that predominantly white institutions should just understand inherently there is a mistrust. It is hundreds and hundreds of years of mistrust. So anytime you're coming to the table with people of color, you have to know that it's not that we're not coming in good faith. We don't trust you for a very good reason. So with that said, be open to taking the advice of the person you came to.
Mhm.
If you come to me and you want to work with me and collaborate with me, you tell me the project and I say that's hella racist, I need you to ask me, why do you say that? I don't need you to argue with me, because I think that, again, it's just some things we just need, some baseline facts we just need to start out with. And one of them is there is a reason. The very, very specific, each culture can point to very specific points in history where we have been undermined by white arts institutions.
And
So that, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, and the other thing, if they're listening carefully, if the institution is listening carefully, they should also realize that, you know, you don't represent an entire group of people, right? People are
Right.
different, and so as Deborah was saying, that role of liaison is important to at sometimes be able to say, you know, I personally don't know what everybody thinks about this, but I know a few other people that you can ask to help you figure it out. And so I don't become the only person in that room, the only Mexican or Latino sitting at the table, representing people who are vastly different and varied. And if they're listening, they should know that you are one person in a diverse group.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you all so much for for all of this really generative conversations and points. I think, to be honest, one of the things that always baffles me about a question of ethics, like right when we're asking like white institution to think about how to collaborate, is, you know, ultimately it's really about relationships, as was said, right? And so when you think about like how you would approach your grandma or how you would approach somebody who's in relationship with you, like that's really the baseline of what culturally specific people of color, LGBTQ communities are like asking, right? It's like listening, respect, like I am your equal, right? And it's, you know, there's a level of power, obviously, of resources, of status, of reputation that white institutions just like embody in this way that they're like, well, no, I'm your like this is a gift. It's like a handout, right? So like what I'm hearing is this shift that's like radically necessary around, again, co-conspired or like really building relationship as like the main point to ethical collaboration. Yeah.
I actually want to add, I forgot to mention proper compensation too. Make sure you pay the people that you're collaborating with well, because they're bringing, you know, we're bringing our time and our expertise and our knowledge, right? And we're sharing that. So compensate us well for that.
Yes.
Yep. Goes back to investment, right? How are you paying? What? I have two more questions for you all, and then I'm excited to open it to our audience for the questions that they may have. So my next question is, what do you need as cultural keepers and institutions to maintain, to sustain, to evolve a successful future in the work that you do, right? In the work of preserving and celebrating your histories, your art, right? So maybe in addition to the things that we've talked about, are there any other things that come to mind?
You know, oh, go ahead.
No. You go ahead.
I was going to say, what I think of when I think of my institution, what we need is we need more young people coming out of college, coming out of training. We need, you know, we education has to be part of this whole conversation. And so for me, I need more talent. Not that we don't have it, but we need to make sure that fountain keeps going, that people keep getting excited about embracing a career, whether it's in the arts or otherwise, and that those means of going through higher education, because let's face it, that diploma in this society counts for a lot. And so we just have to keep getting more and more of those diplomas out there, because I know that we have very talented and very bright generation coming up, and we just need to support them. However we do it, that's what we need to do, because otherwise institutions like mine will just become dry, dusty places that talk about the past. So believe it or not, I mean, yeah, we do need more funding, but ultimately we need more artists and more curators and more directors and more development directors, so they can go find more money. That's what we really need.
For me, it's twofold. Culturally, I my prayer every night at bedtime and every morning is that Black people in America understand that art is a human right, that art is their right. It is not a privilege that is reserved for a handful of white folks, that it is your God-given right to live in your art and create the story, because no community is a monolith. There are as many Black stories in this world as there are Black people. And I need my community to live in the joy and to shed some of the respectability politics that have kept us from believing that you can live as an artist, that you can eat and live indoors and keep a roof over your head and still enjoy the art that feeds your soul. All of those things are possible. And to that end, we need funding. I I have a whole hashtag I do all year about defund white theater, because what a lot of foundations, private foundations, organizations do is they sponsor the large white theaters that they know to do small programming in Black and Brown communities, and then they send the white folks to teach the Eurocentric art in the Black community. And trickle down economics hasn't worked anywhere, and it certainly doesn't work in art. So I need foundation, I need funders, I need people with money to give that money to the BIPOC community of choice, instead of giving that money and being so generous with that money with the larger white institutions, because it never trickles down. We never see it. It never translates into an artist being able to pay their bills, ever. So those are my wants, needs, and desires at this moment.
Yeah, I agree with that. Because we know there's so much money out there, right? They're sending stuff to Mars. Like, what if that money stayed here and was invested in our art and our communities, right? Like, I mean, that's a lot of money that we could nurture and grow so many artists. And I think, we also need to just, as a society, put more emphasis on art and the arts, and really, put emphasis on the importance of that, and yeah, like how our cultures have survived because of the art that we create, and will continue to, right? So, like, there's the indigenous futurism movement, and there's other futurism movements happening too, because we know we have a future, we know we're going to be there, but we need people to invest in that and to follow along. And I think you're right, like the people that have the money, give us the money, don't give me the money, don't give the money to the Field Museum. And yeah, and I think too, it's, just kind of, to follow up on everything that I've been saying too about, who has authority and how, these institutions have, stolen our cultures. Now's the time, and now's a good time to just take agency and create our own spaces. And so I've been holding back on this whole time, and I think this kind of leads into the next question too, but I'm one of the co-founders of a newly formed Center for Native Futures, which is an art space that created by a small collective of us that are Native artists, to provide support and services to other Native artists, but to grow that Native art community here in Chicago. So we're done with other people, like trying to tell us, who we are, and tell, tell the story about us. It's our turn now, and it's our turn to have that space and create that space for us. So that's, but to maintain and sustain that, yes, we're going to need tons of funding.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, and wrapping us up, and actually, I received a question from an audience member that's kind of will get us a little bit at, like, do we create our own, or do we kind of work within the institutions that exist? So we'll get there in a second, but I wanted to wrap us up with this kind of more formal discussion and asking what's ahead for you all. And Deborah, you kind of started to get at it, right? But what's ahead for you? What are the opportunities you are most excited to catalyze as a culturally specific institution?
Yeah, and I do want to mention too that one of our other co-founders, amazing, fabulous artists, and my sister and partner in crime, Andrea Carlson, is here watching us today too. So I want to give her a shout out as one of our co-founders. But yeah, that's where we're moving. We're hoping. We had our first event a few weeks ago where that was our kind of official announcement, launching our center. But we hope to do some artist talks with some amazing Native artists, and as a way to introduce who all the co-founders are. And then we have a huge for us, event that we hope to plan for the fall. And hopefully, you know, our dream is to have a space modeled after Hyde Park Art Center, you know, having studio spaces and workshop spaces and gallery space. That's our dream. But for now, we will have a gallery space in the Marquette building that, you know, hopefully we'll be able to open with our first show, a group exhibition this fall. So yeah, definitely we'll be sharing that out with folks and yelling really loudly about all of that.
This year, the Stillwell Institute for Contemporary Black Art, we will be hosting our Southeast Performance Arts Festival, August 21st, outdoor festival. It is our second year. Last year, we had to do it virtually. But what we do is we sponsor, this year, we're going to sponsor 7 performance artists, Black performance artists, to come in, and we will pay them to perform. And we're going to do a whole live stream of everybody's performance and have it edited. And it's going to be an amazing outdoor event because everybody needs to get out the house. So that is what is coming up for us. And then we will get back on our fellowship track for 2022, where we do 2 8-week fellowships with artists, Black artists from the Chicagoland area across genres. So we're due for some photography and some visual art when we can get back into some spaces. So that'll be for 2022. But yeah,
Nice.
check us out.
Nice. You know, we decided to open on July 1st. So we're racing to open the museum to the public on July 1st. It should be wonderful. We've got some new pieces in the collection. We have a great solo exhibit by Carmen Chami. And then in September, we're opening the Day of the Dead exhibit, right? And that's our annual, very popular exhibition. And that exhibit oftentimes gives us the wall space to speak loudly about social issues. You know, we've done pieces in the past, or we've hosted artists who have done pieces about crossing the border, immigration, about gun control, about gang violence, and a lot of these social ills that take people away from our families. And so during the exhibit Day of the Dead, we oftentimes do get political. Our artists are able to sort of shout loudly about what needs to change in the city or in this country. Sometimes even what needs to change back in Mexico, right? Because they're not perfect over there either. And then the other thing that I want to say is that we're going to be opening an exhibit at the same time as the Day of the Dead. It's a portrait show, believe it or not. It's a portrait show, but it's portraits of community. It's called Reframing Comunidad. 2 very strong Chicana artists from California, from different generations. And the exhibit, when you look at the artists and what they're doing, it also talks about mentorship. So it's about 2 women artists who devoted their life, who are incredible artists, and they've devoted their life to this art making, and there is a mentorship between the 2 of them that is beautiful. And I think that that's another sort of important sort of unspoken thing that happens in the arts. We look to each other, right? Sometimes we disagree with each other, but we look to each other and learn from their mistakes, their successes, and follow in those footsteps. So I invite everybody in September to come see that exhibit as well. It's Esther Hernandez and Shizu Saldamando, who are both incredible artists who do portraits of people around them in everyday life.
Beautiful. As you all were sharing, I was like, oh, I should have asked this at the very end so that people could like leave remembering all the brilliant things that you all are doing. But I'm just going to invite the audience to, you know, to try to remember, or to just kind of follow up on our guests' websites and other kind of platforms. So I have a few questions that I've received in the chat. If anyone wants to share or ask a question, verbally, then please feel free to do so. Maybe we can just use the raise hand function, and then I can know to call on you. But otherwise, I'm going to ask some of the questions that were posed in the chat. These two questions are coming from Faheem. The first question was around, the first question is it more important to start our own institutions or change the non-culturally specific institutions that already exist?
Wow.
I think it's not an either or. I think it's a both and. I think you as an individual in your politics, how you orient to the work is the decision on whether you start your own institution. I started an institution because there was a specific thing I saw happening in Black art that I did not see. I personally have not seen anybody just give artists money just to do art for art's sake without questioning them, without there being an end, an agenda. And I wanted to create an organization that gave that support, those resources, financial, sometimes it's space, sometimes it's hardware, whatever it is, without being invested in what type of art they create. That was the motivation for me. But my friends that go into the predominantly white institutions, like our friend Deborah, that go into these institutions and do that work, that's really important work, to have that voice at the table. So I think it's much like going into ministry. You have to be called to start your own organization. That's a calling, and everybody doesn't have it. But I don't think there should be a push for either or. I think they're necessary. It's necessary for our individual voices of color to be everywhere. Our queer voices, our friends that are LGBTQIA+, it's important for those voices to be everywhere. It's important for our disabled community to have representation, to have their own organizations and representation everywhere.
I agree completely with what you just said. And I think that, the role of advocacy within an institution, like what Deborah's doing, is so fundamental. In other words, those institutions, if they are truly going to get all kinds of government tax dollars or foundation dollars to represent the society, then they need to represent the society. So we need to keep them accountable. We need to keep them honest and focused on a true mission, right? But at the same time, if those institutions receive a lot of funding for these kind of like smaller projects, it's kind of like you check the box, done, good, we don't have to do that for a while. And that money could have been used to keep the doors open of a smaller cultural center that's in the community, or a museum that's in a city. If it's a matter of keeping the doors open to that place, then my goodness, that is also fundamental. So
Right.
it's both. It's definitely both.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. It is both, because, for as long as these institutions have our stuff, yes, we need to be in there. We need to be the watchdogs. We need to make sure that they do change, and that they, there is better representation of our cultures. And that has to come from us. So we have to be in there in those spaces until we get all our things back, right? But this is like, this is talking about like the anthropological, archaeological institutions. But then when you think about like, art spaces, art institutions, and museums, we're not in there enough. They need us in there. They need more of us in there. But at the same time, we do need to create those spaces where we are comfortable, where we know we're welcome, because we're not really welcome in other spaces yet. We're working on it. Right? So that's what they need to change. But at the same time, we need to be there, but we also need to go here where we're comfortable, we're with our own people, we're being nurtured and supported in the very way that we need to be, so that we can create that art over here and push it over there.
If I could just throw one more thing out there, it's so crazy that we have to defend diversity in society. I mean, it's so clear to me that diversity in society gives you so many more creative options down the road, right? If everyone is the same and sort of thinking, inside the box or on a certain path, you will be ill prepared for the future, I think. And a society will thrive if it has incredible diversity, because all that diversity will bring forth creativity from different perspectives in different places and spaces. Sometimes you hear a solution from somebody who's very, very different than you, and it's kind of like a wow, like that's an incredible solution to this that is not in my path. I can't see it with my eyes, but they were able to see it and recognize it and embrace it and then bring it to everybody. And so the fact that we need to like defend how important diversity is in society is crazy.
Mhm.
I appreciate this second question from Faheem, because it's calling us to think about kind of internal community. So the question is, how do you deal with trust issues or lack of trust from the communities you are advocating for? Any thoughts on that?
I can definitely address this one, man. Yeah, working with community sounds so beautiful. It is hard work because, as I just mentioned, community is diverse. I'm not even talking about the pan Latino Latinx community. I'm talking about like just the Mexican American community. We have different points of view and we disagree strongly on a lot of things. And as a museum, when you give wall space to a specific idea, a specific artist, you may have to defend that. You may have to say why that artist and that piece of art should be on the wall. And it is a difficult conversation to have. But I think that if you have a good track record within the community, there'll be, there may be some hurt feelings, there may be some grudges, there may be some jealousy. That's all part of a community. But in the end, if you have a track record that sort of shows that you are balanced or fair and people can see that, I think that goes a long way. So don't have to agree with you, but I respect the work you have been doing. And then they'll say, okay, and now when do I get my turn on that wall? So yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Carla.
No, I was just going to real quick. I think sometimes for me, it is a bumping into my standard for art and what I believe is representative art, bumping up against someone else's standard and what they believe is representative art. And I think there's, in the Black community, there is some grace that is missing that I have to bring to the table and that I ask that Black artists bring to the table. Because I've noticed, we have a very distinct what is respectable and what is not respectable, what defines our humanity in the eyes of white folks and what undermines our humanity in the eyes of white folks. And my is sometimes about, I don't care about the eyes of white folks. So it is often difficult to have that dialogue with people who are not my enemy. They just believe that you have to maintain the appearance of humanity, and trying to get people to understand you can't make anybody believe you're human that doesn't believe it already. So just tell your story. And to find a way to have those conversations without judgment. It's a line. It's a line. And but I think it's important that we walk that line to continue to engage with community, to get us to that respectful place where there's a difference between what you like and what's valid. You don't have to like it. but it's still valid. It's still art. It's still important. So that's a line.
Yeah, that's it's complicated. It's so complicated. And there was a time where I used to think that, oh, just working in Native community is just so hard. And I always hear from people, other Native people, like, oh yeah, the community I'm working in is so difficult. Oh yeah, no, but mine is really difficult. And, I think a lot of it is because we're our harshest critics. We
Mm-hmm.
so critical and we criticize each other. And it took me a while to realize that, well, no, it's not just Native community, like other communities too. Like, it's just difficult. It's difficult to work with your own people sometimes. But, why do I do it? I do it because they're my people, no matter what. They're my people, whether they trust me or not. They're my people. There's so many times where, things would happen in the community, there's always politics or drama or whatever. And, those are the kinds of things where I feel like, I just want to walk away from this. I don't want to have anything to do with them anymore. I am done. I'm going to go work over here. But then I find that I just can't stand it over there. It's like, and then I come right back, right? Because what I do and what drives me is that regardless of what's happening here in this community, these are the people that I know. And these are the people that I want to make change for and do things for, whether they appreciate it or not, whether they like it or not. I don't need for everyone to like me. If they don't want to trust me, that's fine. I just know that what I'm doing is for them, whether they, whether they know it or not. And that's what keeps me going. So, I mean, it's such a complicated thing though, our communities, right? It's like a family, like within your own family too, right? Like you're always bickering about something. You don't agree on things. I don't trust my cousin for whatever reason.
You have disagreements in your family?
What? God.
Just humanity, right? We're all human beings, and it doesn't matter where we are. I think there's just always going to be those kinds of complications. But as long as we know that we're doing good work and we're moving forward, in a good way, that's the course that we need to be on.
I have a third question in the chat from Megha, which is kind of adding to or building on Faheem's question around build your own or, join the masses. So the question is, what do you envision as an ideal or equitable relationship between culturally specific art spaces and so-called main institutions? Is it funding distributed equally between them? Is it funding distributed proportionally? Should we get rid of the mainstream institution as an end goal? And the question is in the chat if you want to refer back to it.
Just very briefly, I would say, yeah, we should have access to that funding as well. And I would even say we should have access to those gallery walls as well. My community should be on those walls. My community, when people go to a mainstream institution, they should also see my community proudly displayed on those walls. So it's and those are probably connected in some way, funding and real estate in the gallery.
Yeah, my question is always, why does this institution have the money? What how did they get the coins? And I think that's a question that funders need to start asking. Why are you, predominantly white institution A, putting in a grant for this culturally specific work? The funders are always talking about paring down or how we want to make our applications simpler. But I don't think you need to make them simpler. I think you need to ask the right questions to the right community. Because if Native Culture Institution B has applied for this same grant. How did you get to the point that white institution A got the money? And did they stipulate, did they tell you, well, we'll work with this institution? Is that what made you give them the money? Why am I being invited to the table at this point? So these are questions. This is always my question. How did we get to a point where these institutions are so comfortable asking for this culturally specific programming money? And why are funders so comfortable giving it? Because I talk to culturally specific institutions all the time, leaders that don't know about half the money. Then, like, we have these conversations amongst ourselves. Did you apply for that grant? What grant? What are you talking about? Wait, what money? So I think, I don't know if this answers the question or addresses the question at all, but when I go to the table as a culturally specific institution, I want to know how you even got this money. We can't talk until I know that the funders know that you're bringing me in to do the bulk of the work. I actually told a funder. I actually had to do this once because the institution did not tell the funder that this was my work. So I went to the funder. And I think that is part of the pivot, the defund white theater, the defund white art that we institutions have to make. Why are you calling me? How did you get this money? What do you want from me? And it needs to be, and all it, those are the questions that I have. So I think that's my long-winded, because it's not so much a response. This just enrages me because it happens. So I will simmer my rage.
Since I'm on the kick of, decolonization, I think, the process needs to be decolonized too, right? And, like everything, so many things just need to be decolonized. And I think institutions need to be told that, or they need to understand and learn what their responsibilities are. Like, if they really cared about the cultures that they're representing, that they want to work with, then, step back. It's time for you, and this is what I say about, like, like white curators or other white people that come into these spaces where we belong. Like, they need to step down. And so institutions should also step down and say, hey, you know what, there are these other, and send funders our way, right? If they were aware of us, send funders our way and teach those funders to invest in our communities and in us directly. And so that's one thing. But I also think too that when we're talking about, like, diversifying museum walls with our art, so that our communities feel like they're a part of it, I think that museums also need to, they say they're doing this, but they need to have people like us in those positions that are writing for those grants, that are looking out for those grants, that are looking for the right ones to apply for, and or the ones that, like, no, this is not appropriate for our institution or this white institution. I'm going to tell somebody else about this. So I mean, they need our eyes, our ears, our expertise, our knowledge in all these various parts of those institutions as well.
And if I may just jump on that beautiful point, our expertise, our knowledge, too often they need, so I'm thinking about funding, the funding source. Too often they need, signatures or consultants that have PhDs, right? And so they've got a system in place where the hurdle is this high, and to get a PhD is not an easy thing, as many of you know. Well, the knowledge and the experience that comes with the community work, I think, is equal to a PhD in education. I mean, when you've spent many years working within community, it should also be valued as much as having the PhD sign off on the project, or the PhDs, right? The more PhDs you have in a proposal, a grant proposal, the better your chances are of getting that funding.
Mm-hmm.
The community work surpasses the PhD, I would say, to an extent. I'd love to invite one more question from the audience. If anyone has something that they would like to bring to our space, I'll give a moment. Okay. I'm going to read Mariela's quote or chat because I think it just kind of speaks to how I feel, and then I'll riff off of it. But thank you, Mariela, for staying to the panelists. I'm so grateful to you all for sharing so generously. I have learned from you. I have empathized deeply with many of your stories, and I have laughed with you. So I appreciate being able to moderate this generative conversation. I appreciate the work that you all are doing. It is the important work. I thank you for being my co-conspirators and for coming to the table unapologetically and or creating our own tables, whatever is necessary. This was a really generative and brilliant conversation. So thank you so much, Deborah.
Thank you for having us.
And I'll pass it to Sierra to kind of close us off.
Yes, thank you so much, Ife, for moderating the panel tonight. Really appreciate your questions and thoughtful research that went into those as well. And thank you so much to all of our panelists here for participating, for sharing their time, their space, their energy, and most importantly, their wisdom. Like Pascale said, definitely want to move beyond allyship and move into being a co-conspirator. And please, please continue to support these spaces and the initiatives that they're doing so that they can keep doing the good work that the community needs. And investment isn't just in your pockets, but it's also in word of mouth and spreading the word as well too. So think about that as currency, community as currency, and the spreading of resources as well. So thank you all so much for the work that you do. We appreciate it here at the Hyde Park Arts Center, as well as in the community at large as well. And thank you all so much, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Peace, everyone. Thank you.